Hi, I'm Mary with allnurses.com, and we're here in Houston at Magnet, and today we have with us author Marcus Engel. He wrote the book called The Other Side of the Stethoscope, 33 Insights for Excellent Patient Care. And as the book title says, the book provides insights for patient caregivers. So Mark, tell us what was the inspiration behind it.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me here today. I've been familiar with All Nurses for a while. So The Other End of the Stethoscope is a memoir of my experiences as an acute care patient after suffering massive trauma at the hands of a second-party drunk driver. When I was a freshman in college, I was home for the weekend, met up with some friends from church camp, and went to a hockey game that Saturday night, and it was on our way home from that game that another car struck my friends and I, and that crash not only left me completely blind in both eyes, but I also have what is called a Lefort 3 fracture, which means that every bone from my hairline through my chin was absolutely crushed. Went through about 300 hours worth of reconstructive facial surgery at Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. This is the teaching hospital associated with Washington University's med school in St. Louis. So when you've spent as much time as I have at the other end of the stethoscope, you have seen the good, the bad, and the profound in patient care. And as a speaker and author, that's what I try to do, is to take these narratives and these stories of healthcare and to try to help nurses and really any type of healthcare professional that interacts with a patient how to communicate more compassionately and to understand a little more the vulnerability and suffering that those patients are going through.
Since you were in the hospital for an extended period of time, and we know that nurses have the most contact time with patients, were there any nurses that stood out to you?
I'm really glad you asked that, because both my book, The Other End of the Stethoscope, and then my other healthcare specific book, which is called I'm Here, Compassionate Communication in Patient Care, both of those tell lots of stories about the nurses and the caregivers who were there for me. And in fact, the title of I'm Here comes because the night that they pulled me into the emergency room, I was hanging by a string and nobody really knew if I was going to live or die. There was a 20-year-old patient care tech who held my hand that entire night. And throughout the night, anytime I would wake up, she would squeeze my hand and she would say the same things over and over to me, which I think are the most compassionate words any human being can say to another. She just kept saying, Marcus, I'm here, I'm here. That comfort of human presence. I always say that human presence is the cornerstone of caregiving, but we can actually take that a lot further, that our presence with another human being during their time of suffering, that's the very foundation of what our humanity is based upon. So Jennifer, that first night in the emergency room, Jennifer just saying, I'm here and being present for me, that's the number one tip I go back to with healthcare professionals. Just remember to be present. When there's nothing else you can do, at least you can be present to witness that other person suffering. So that was Jennifer. And strangely enough, I wrote I'm Here and I wrote Stethoscope, and both include the story of Jennifer and I'm Here. But the truth of the matter is, for 20 years post-trauma, I've never had any idea who Jennifer was. I've never known her last name. I never knew her position in the emergency room. Then, strangely enough, several years ago, I was keynoting back at the hospital that saved my life, Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. As soon as I got done giving a keynote, the director of the patient experience department came up to the front of the room and said, Marcus, we've got a surprise for you. We found Jennifer. And then for the first time in 20 years, I was finally able to hold her hands again and tell her thank you. It's absolutely one of the most precious moments of my life.
I'm sure that you made such an impression on her that you touched her in a special way too. And for you to thank her publicly in your book and tell her about this meant more to her than you could imagine.
What I did not know when I was reintroduced to Jennifer was that in the 20 years since that trauma, Jennifer had not only become a nurse, but she was also the clinical nurse manager on the very floor where I spent an extended part of my stay in the ICU. She was the clinical nurse manager for the surgical intensive care ICU. my first question upon being reintroduced to Jennifer was, "You remember?" Because how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients roll through the ER? How are you ever going to remember somebody? But Jennifer said, "Oh, yes, I remember it like it was yesterday." And what I later learned is that about the time that Jennifer and I were reintroduced, she was thinking about turning in her nurse's license for a real estate license and leaving the profession altogether. And then she learned what I was doing and realized, wow, what I do really does have an impact. And that's the message that I want to get out to all the healthcare professionals across the country is you all, every single person, every human being has that ability to be present for another human being while they suffer. And that's what we all can do.
Yes, she couldn't really help at that time with your physical pain, but she reached you in a way that was very special. And we have to remember that we can do that.
Yeah.
We don't have to fill up the silence with words. Just our presence is there. And just to say something simple as, I'm here for you. I'm present. Yes.
Yeah. It's a cornerstone of caregiving, right?
Exactly. We are a website of nurses and nursing students. We have more than 1 million members, and we reach a lot of nurses. With your unique perspective, what are the most important things that you would like to tell our nurses, our nursing community, that would impact them positively themselves and also have an impact on patient care?
The number one tip or suggestion that I give is really based on that brief experience with Jennifer. It's that being present, it's holding a hand, it's saying I'm here. Another thing that I think is always important to remember is that unless a patient is going into a hospital to have a baby or have a facelift, they really probably don't want to be there. Right? And that is human suffering. We're in the hospital because we're sick or have an injury or something. Most people don't choose to spend their time, most patients don't choose to spend their time at the hospital. And yet, that is very much a version of human suffering. I always tell the story whenever I'm keynoting at hospitals and for nursing conventions around the country. I tell people, once I lost my sight, it doesn't take a lot of thought processes to understand that I went through a lot of counseling. I spent a lot of time going through cognitive therapy with psychiatrists and with social workers and counselors. And one of the things that I learned very early on in my counseling was a little phrase. It's kind of counseling 101, and it says, hurting people hurt people. And I always want healthcare professionals to remember that, because that patient may be a complete jerk to the nurse at the bedside. They may use a bunch of profanity. They may complain. They may be bitter. And the thing to always remember is that patient may not be like that any other time. It's just that they're currently in pain. And whether that's physical pain, post-operational, or post-injury, or post-chemo, whatever the case is, those patients are hurting, and remembering that hurting people hurt people, I hope that kind of brings about some deeper levels of humanity and understanding the suffering and stressors of patients. And not just patients, but the family members too. I'd always remind people that for me, when I lost my sight, I was an 18-year-old college freshman. So my parents were incredibly suffering through this process, having to watch their own child recover. They endured a lot of suffering themselves. And I can't tell you how much it means to me to this day to know that many of the nurses and my other healthcare professionals would take my parents aside so that they could have some time to grieve on their own. And remembering that those families are very much a part of the patient experience. I think that's a huge key too.
I agree. Most times there is a family component there.
Yeah.
And especially when it's a child that has had a terrible accident like that. There's not much worse than that. To have it be your child, you would rather it be you.
My parents are rock stars, and the reason that they are is because, we got great care. We had people that were looking out for not just me, but us as a family. Really, really always appreciate those caregivers who would treat my parents like they were individuals too and understood their pain and would sit with them and just say, I'm here to them.
Has this experience of you creating books, you going around and speaking to groups, that must have been therapeutic for you?
Yes. In my academic work, I have a master's in a field called narrative medicine. And if you haven't heard of narrative medicine, it's not real surprising because the field has only been around less than 10 years. There's only one program in the country that has this program, and that's at Columbia University in New York. And so what we do in narrative medicine is we take the stories of healthcare and we try to turn them into something from which others can learn. And my specific work in narrative is to help nurses utilize writing and journaling as a therapeutic or reflective practice whenever the stressors of the jobs, the compassion fatigue and burnout start to set in, how to use writing. And so I know this anecdotally that writing has helped me understand so much of the medical nightmare that I endure. But I think even just taking a few moments every day to write our high point of the day and the thing that maybe if we had to do the day over again, we would have made differently, the high point of the day and the thing that you would change tomorrow. Just keeping a running list of those notes, that's been proven to act like a gratitude exercise. And hopefully then people can claim their own stories and then to use writing as a therapeutic practice like I've been able to do. If you want to know more about that, you can look at narrativenursing.com too.
I just want to thank you again for coming and sharing with us. Your story is very inspirational. I'm glad that you were able to turn this catastrophic event into something positive to help other patients and nurses and other caregivers. So thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure. I owe my life to nurses. So thank you for doing what you guys do every single day.